What I'm going to demonstrate here is actually how to use a vacuum press. This is a vacuum press. This white melamine chipboard is what they call the platen. And it's got grooves cut into it to allow air to evacuate. And they all lead to this hole where the nozzle from the vacuum pump is inserted. When you're doing flat work, you would generally put a caul, a flat piece of what I use is usually masonite with the white finish on it for my caul. The reason I like the white finish is that it's easier to, it's less likely to stick, but I always still wax. You always want to, whenever you're using something that you don't want to stick, either use wax or packing tape, especially if you're veneering face down. If you're doing two faces at the same time, you need to have a caul on top as well to distribute the pressure. Again, it doesn't have to be very thick, 1/8 inch, whatever. The thing about the one on top, it needs to be pretty much exactly the size of the piece that the panel. You don't want it to overhang because it'll pull down. It'll probably break. Actually, the pressure is enough to cause it to break. But if it doesn't, it'll cause it to bridge and it'll create a gap just past the edge where it's not putting enough pressure. And then the system, this is a urethane bag. It's the tougher. He sells some vinyl bags. They're less expensive. So when you make a form, you're making it pretty sturdy. I just brought this as an old form. Actually, originally, this form I used clamping. But a form like this works just as well in the vacuum bag. It's the spacing you want is dependent upon how thick your skin is. And the rule here he gives is if you're working with a 3/8 skin, you want the spacing 3 inches apart. And normally you would do that as a grid. You can get away with doing it linear like this at this size, but generally you want it as a grid because you also want to support when you really suck this down. If I really suck it down, I'll feel the ribs. So if you have some supports going this way, it would be better. But as I say, I designed this form. This form was built for actually using clamps, but it's a small enough one to bring along. So if it's 3/8, you want to use 3-inch spacing in your grid. If you double it up, use 3/4. Then you can go to 6 inches, 6-inch spacing. So you can use up a fair amount of material, and your forms can get pretty heavy if you're working large. And that's why the air bladder system really is an advantage, because you not only have to wrestle the piece into the bag, but the form as well, because you usually have to put the piece on the form and put it in the bag. So this is their literature, anyway, about how to use their system. So anybody who's interested in looking at that, feel free. Okay. So that would be if you're doing flat. Now we're really going to talk about forming curves. And the thing about a vacuum bag is that you don't need a two-part form. You don't need a two-part form to clamp either. You just need a lot more clamps. And if you're doing complicated things, form making is kind of a skill in itself. For a simple arc in a bag, you only need one form. And I didn't bring any cut laminations, so I'm using basically bending ply to represent that. And the fact is that this is also a way of working with bending ply to get bent panels. So you're kind of getting two lessons in one here. If this were solid wood, what I would do is I would cut a test lamination and just bend it. Now that bends fairly easily. So say I'm going to only bend 4 layers of that. So it would only need to be this thick. So I could get away with that. Now, I would probably, maybe if I wanted, whatever my final dimension I want, I tend to work it's better to work with odd numbers. It's the same reason plywood is odd number. You know, you get a better balanced panel. You don't have to, but you know, it's kind of recommended that. I mean, a lot of people worry about springback. A lot of times springback is not really, you know, that big a deal. If you look at it this way, whatever the bend you've got, if you take that down and just trace that, then use that as your, you know, that's it, you know. So it moved a quarter, you know, it flattened out a quarter of an inch, you know. Who knows? Who cares, you know? So whenever I'm doing this, usually when I work with bends or curves, I draw a full-size curve. And whatever I actually get, I lay back down on that full-size curve and redraw it. And I'm using that full-size drawing for joinery purposes, because when you're working with curves, the square is useless to you. So by having the full-size drawing, you can then have a baseline for perpendiculars and horizontals and be able to work that out where things intersect.
What is bending plywood?
Bending plywood, there are 2 kind of products on the market right now. One is called wiggle wood or wacky wood, and that's usually 3/8, although I've seen some 1/4 inch of this around. It's basically a wood that bends just by itself, you know, I mean, but it won't hold its shape. It only holds its shape once it's glued to something else, and I mean, basically the same way laminations work. And then the other is Italian poplar, 1/8 inch material, which is also bends. Now these materials come in sheets, 4x8 and 8x4. There is a distinction between those 2, even though it sounds like I'm saying the same thing. It has to do with the direction of the grain. A 4x8 is just like a regular sheet of plywood where the grain's running long way, and an 8x4 is running horizontally. And you may want to pick that depending on, you know, what it is you're trying to make or bend, okay? So those are the 2 basic bending plies that are on the market, okay? And then what you want to do is you want to have a caul for the top. And, no, both are too long, okay? To spread the pressure out evenly across the top. Again, that needs to be waxed or taped so that it won't stick, and you put it on top. I've spread glue between all these layers, putting glue on both sides, both faces that join together. And then I just take this, and then if I could get a hand, we'll just a lot of times when I put a piece in the form, I might just tape at the center as well, just to kind of hold it in place, especially if it's a complicated form. In this case, it's not that complicated, so you can just kind of massage it in place. And then you seal this up. We've got to get this one on first. Pull that out. Yeah. I guess it's time. It's still going to be a bit of a problem to stretch. When you just pull the bag at right at that corner, just pull that so it straightens right out. Let me get this started. Don't go there yet. Okay. Start. So This takes a while with this much air in it, so I can kind of move things around. Although I shouldn't want to move it that much. Put it up here. There we go. Yeah. And the only thing you have to worry about is that sometimes the bag will want to suck under, especially when you've got a lot of resistance and you're forcing it down. I've been known to get up on the table and sit on the piece and work it down. I mean, whatever works. Sometimes when I'm doing a negative, when I am actually doing a concave, I'll actually just get up there and put my knee in it to pull it down. The vacuum won't pull into something. You've got to get it down there and then it'll hold it. And that's basically it. Now that's one way. You can have a piece in the bag without the platen. The platen isn't absolutely required. And then there's another way that I'm going to show you how to do it. So if you're going to work without the platen, this is a mesh that they call it an evacuation mesh that you can buy from vacuum systems. This is just gutter screening. You know, you can buy anywhere. You can use rope. All you want is to have an avenue so the air will move to the outlet. And I use this as the point of plugging in my nipple. It's like a mini platen. Because the form might not fit. Like on my chair, I can just get that form in here. And there's no way I could have a platen in here with it. Or the form is so complicated that, you know, the platen's just in your way. So you could do it without it. So what I would do is put this little piece on, which is like a platen, and then I would run this in. And it doesn't have to go everywhere. And I'd bring it back down to there. And I don't know how this is going to work exactly. Actually, I think I need more in the bag than this. Yeah. Right. Okay. And this seal can actually bend as well. You know, it will sometimes in the form, it'll curve around. I mean, there's a certain point at which it'll fail, but it'll bend a fair amount, sometimes to accommodate your form. Oh, you got the platen here. I don't know why.
What determines the amount of vacuum that you have to apply? When should I do 20 pounds, when should I do 26 pounds?
Cool. That's basically it. Okay, I have one more thing I'm going to show you, which is how you can use a vacuum outside of a form outside of the bag. In fact, this system can be used to do what do you call them? Curved stair stretchers. So this is what's referred to as a lamination bag. And the way it works is that you put your laminations inside of it.
I guess you sent a video of them doing this on a spiral staircase?
I haven't, but I've made a spiral staircase. Yeah. Okay. Oh, got to put my evacuation material is good here too.
How does that cause the evacuation?
I'm sorry?
How does that cause the evacuation?
I'm sloppy. The pressure of the vacuum. So you put on a little bit of pressure just to kind of hold things together. You fall back on the old clamps. I don't want it that clamped down. I'm going to let a little air get back in here because you don't want it too tight, because then the pieces won't slide past each other when they need to. Okay. So then you just put it on the form. And again, here you don't want to clamp too hard because you can deform your piece. So you just need to clamp it enough to hold it down. But you get the idea. Even though I haven't really pulled it down as well as I can to this end. You say you got the idea? Good. You ready to go?
A little bit more.
Yeah. No, this is really a great way, actually, when you're working with bulky things, you know, to basically just use the vacuum as your clamp to hold the laminations together, and then just clamp it to the form. Well, I guess I bored you enough.